Hi, everyone. This is Enrique Acevedo. It's great to see all of our panelists are ready, that our hosts are ready for this LOFT Charla. It's an important topic. A few weeks ago, I was talking to people at the World Health Organization, at the World Economic Forum, and we all agreed that most of the information, the content that was being produced and generated around the pandemic was coming from the experience of Asia Pacific, of Europe, North America, but there was not enough content and reliable, timely information about what was happening in the Americas. So this is extremely important. I think people, not just in Hispanic America here in the US, but across the continent, should have the right information, the right tools to make important decisions in their lives right now about public health, but also the economic, social, and humanitarian dimension of what we're going through. So to start us off and to welcome this LOFT Charla, I'd like to introduce the President and CEO of the Hispanic Heritage Foundation, Antonio Tijerino. Tony, please lead the way.
Thank you very much, Enrique. And thank you for always being so gracious with your time and position. We really appreciate it. Our community appreciates it. And thank you, CRS, for being such an important partner of the Hispanic Heritage Foundation, especially when we turn from serving Latinos in America to Latin America. From the grand stage at the Kennedy Center to touring through Latin America, witnessing your programs firsthand, to these important forums on the Americas we've been doing, from Capitol Hill to Community Center and Barrios to today's virtual Charla. I also want to thank Hispanics in Philanthropy and the Friends of Puerto Rico for their partnership on this and other programs. As Latinos living in the United States during this devastating pandemic, the state of COVID-19 in our home countries or countries of heritage, as well as the island of Puerto Rico, have come to our concern and added to our anxiety. What is happening back home? That's a question I ask every single day. My father is a 90-year-old diabetic living in Nicaragua, and I have cousins and friends all over Latin America, including Paraguay, where my mother was from. My last trip was for our Youth Awards program in beautiful Puerto Rico, which was at that time trying to rebuild from hurricanes and earthquakes and financial issues, and now this. We were actually ready to expand our programs in Mexico City, and now this. Yet the mainstream news I watch on the pandemic has been focused on U.S. hotspots, leaving many of us needing non-filtered updates from the ground and the state of COVID in Latin America. As an example, my team at the Hispanic Heritage Foundation are from Bolivia, Guatemala, El Salvador, Mexico, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, and I was born in Nicaragua. Although the majority of U.S. Latinos are born here, 1 in 3, or 20 million, were born in Latin America. And all of us as Latinos in the United States are of Latin American heritage, or we wouldn't be, well, Latinos. So yeah, we care about what's happening in Latin America. And we care so much that our remittances to Latin America and the Caribbean have actually risen at a much higher rate than any other region. And many of those have gone down. The U.S. is home to 2/3 of all immigrants from Latin America and the Caribbean overall. And more than 80% of immigrants from Mexico, Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras actually live in the United States. And I am a proud immigrant, as you can see from my t-shirt. Please know our virtual charlas are weekly, part of our COVID response on issues important to our community. We've dealt with issues from mental health to financial empowerment, to educating our kids at home, to caring for our elderly, to even hacking a career during and post-COVID, among other issues we deal with. So please check out our social channels for the next virtual charla. And with that, let me welcome my compañera and gran amiga, Lydia Dibos, who is the Senior Advisor for Strategic Partnerships for Hispanic Development at CRS. Lydia.
Thank you, Tony. Good afternoon, everybody from a sunny Baltimore. We at CRS are so grateful for our longstanding partnership with Tony and the entire HHF team, and very specifically for this opportunity to be with you all today. COVID-19 is wreaking havoc across the world, and for those of us who lead bicultural and binational or transnational lives, what is happening in Latin America and the Caribbean is very important to us. In addition to my being a Peruvian, Colombian American, I spent a number of years working for Catholic Relief Services in Central America. My older son was born in Guatemala. So my heart is always with the most vulnerable in Latin America and the Caribbean, many of who were already experiencing challenges before this pandemic. So I would like to give a huge thank you to HHF, to Enrique Acevedo, to all of my colleagues at CRS, both in the United States and around the world, and a special thank you to all of you who are with us today.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Antonio. It's really great, and it's a privilege to be here today. When Dan Restrepo reached out and told me about the LOFT Charla, I didn't hesitate. I think it's very important, and Antonio and Lydia had pointed that out, that we pay attention to what's going on in our countries of heritage, that we pay attention to what civil society, to what organizations are doing there, not just governments. And for that, we have a very special panel, people from Honduras, the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Mexico. We have people from Puerto Rico today here in our panel also. And, with this very diverse and very smart team that we have assembled today, we're going to be sharing the experiences throughout the continent that of what we're seeing and what can be done to make things better. So a couple of housekeeping items. I ask everyone, of course, to be respectful when they're commenting or asking questions. This is a key part of our interaction today. We want those of you who are joining us to be part of the conversation. So please send us your questions, send us your comments. Make sure that you address those questions to our panelists specifically, so that we can make the flow much more dynamic during our time today. And to kick things off with our charla today, our first speaker, Annie Mayol, the President and COO of Foundation for Puerto Rico, with her presentation, The Opportunity in the Crisis to Accelerate Recovery. And I do want to point out that we have people joining us today from all over the Americas. And that's the most important part of what we're doing here. We're listening to the voices on the ground, to the experiences on the ground, so we can all get a better idea of what's going on. So again, Annie, thank you so much for joining us, and please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Enrique, and thank you, Tony and Lydia. It's an honor to be here in this charla. This is so important, the work that you're doing, that all of the community, the Hispanic community, is doing all over the Americas. And it's interesting because I'm honored to be here talking about Puerto Rico specific, but we're always in a very interesting position because being 100% Hispanic, part of the US, but the door to Americas, it's always very confusing in the position. And, with the current administration, they're even confused about Puerto Rico as well. So it's very interesting. It's very important to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. I want to just briefly highlight what our organization is. Foundation for Puerto Rico is a not-for-profit organization in the island of Puerto Rico. In the next slide, we can quickly go through. We were created in 2011, and really our focus is on social economic development within the island of Puerto Rico. Our mission is to transform Puerto Rico into a thriving destination to the world. And at the end of the day, a lot of the people in this call, that is the focus. A lot of people are confused, yes, in Puerto Rico. But it's so interesting because the island of Puerto Rico and our community, similar to many communities all over America, have been very resilient. We've gone through so much, hurricanes, earthquakes, and now the pandemic. So one of the things that we as an organization have been working on are sort of focusing on helping our community through these very crises and difficult times. And the next slide, we highlight just very quickly, one of the things our organization does is we have, a conglomerate of other NGOs that we work with in Puerto Rico, but we really look at what are the policies that we have to push forward to ensure that that we can be more resilient, that we can have a better future, especially through our economic situation. We work very closely all over the island in community resiliency planning. Is something that we've been doing, especially after Hurricane Maria, but we continue to do that in about 19 towns right now in the island, but we're expanding to every single town with the disaster recovery funding at the federal program. And one of the core areas that we've been working with, which is essential in the discussion today, is the work with small business owners. The core of our economy, similar to the Hispanic community in the U.S., is the small business owner. 80% of our workforce is within small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses in the island of Puerto Rico. So numbers in the U.S. were about maybe 40 or 50% is within small business and medium-sized businesses. In our case, it's 80%. So when a business closes in the island of Puerto Rico, it impacts greatly, and not only the community, but the whole family. And you many know is when a panaderia closes in Puerto Rico, it's the father, the grandfather, the cousin, the brother, they all work there. So whole family may be impacted, the cousins. So it's something that we've been working with very closely and are very much focused on how we work with that now. One of the things I want to take an opportunity is to just highlight some of the things that Puerto Rico has been doing, which is on our next slide, is quickly, what have we been doing since coronavirus, since COVID? And in the case of Puerto Rico, I do have to recognize that the governor of Puerto Rico was very, very innovative and very proactive in quarantining the whole population. It was the first destination in all of the U.S. that was sent home to quarantine with only one positive case in the island, and that's March 16th. We continue to be semi-quarantined. One of the things we did right away was that closed all the small regional airports, only kept one airport, which is the Luis Muñoz Marin International Airport, open. In that case, it helped us really maintain an infrastructure in one location where we can really implement better infrastructure of staying safe. And we actually were one of the first ones to implement screening of visitors when people come in, and they get screened by temperature. And they have a capacity to take the test at the airport voluntarily if they wish so. One of the things that the governor did right away was in the quarantine put curfews, and also worked in how does that, even at some point said only certain cars can come out certain days of the week, et cetera, to really contain, because our healthcare infrastructure is very fragile. So one of the things that we were very concerned is, how are we going to manage if this thing gets out of our hands? Positively, it's been contained. I mean, we still have positive cases, but the number has really become a flat plateau at this point. And the economy started opening in phases starting May 4th. Right now, the opening of phases is mostly professional services, banking industry, insurance companies. Next week, it's the manufacturing, the pharmaceuticals, with very much structured protocols of that they have to certify before or if they open, they have to have a self-certification to present to the governor and to the government. And again, similar to many other locations, it's a lot of local stimulus packages. Federal, we fight with the federal government in making sure Puerto Rico is included in the federal stimulus package. We were included. We were left out in some locations, but we were included. About $2.2 billion of federal funding was given to Puerto Rico. With a lot of support of organizations like the Hispanic Federation, other national organizations that work with Hispanics have supported making sure Puerto Rico is included. So this type of group is very important, not just to the Caribbean and not just to the Hispanics in the U.S., but also to Puerto Rico. As here are just some highlights. The estimates from the economists is that we're going to have an impact of $5.8 billion in the economy of Puerto Rico. There's already approximately 325,000 residents of Puerto Rico that have filed for unemployment, new after coronavirus. There's unemployment before. We had a very high unemployment rate compared to the most of the 50 states. Foundation for Puerto Rico, together with other NGOs, send out a survey that we call Levanta tu Negocio, and it's a survey to small business owners to try to understand. We did that survey immediately when we went on quarantine to understand what were the impacts, what were the policies that we needed to push forward. And in that survey, we found very alarming numbers. 58% of businesses are closed, 20% of them are partially open. 60% of them cannot operate past 1 month without revenues. So many of them, when they answer, they may not be closed, but they're about to close, but they may end up closing soon. And unfortunately, even though we've gone through Maria, even though we've gone through earthquakes, still our small business owners, 85% of them do not have a contingency plan or a preparedness plan. Next slide. Sorry. One of the things that we have at Foundation talked about, however, is, there's no future in rebuilding the past. How do you take crises and make them as opportunities? And in the case of Puerto Rico, we really see that the things that the government has done swiftly in protecting the island's health has created an opportunity for us to leapfrog a sector of the economy, which is the only sector that in the past 10 years and an economic downturn, the only sector that had some growth, and this is key to all of the Caribbean, is the sector of tourism. But how do you take tourism in a situation like coronavirus, which is the industry most impacted? How do you use that as an opportunity to bring people to Puerto Rico? And I'll just briefly go through that. And here are some numbers of how well we were doing even after Maria, how we were able to really take a downturn in a positive, go on a positive route and bring people to the island. And you talked about trips that have been doing, especially by NGOs and others. And that's really helped our economy, especially our rural communities. Most of our communities outside of the metropolitan area, San Juan, have lost a lot of population. So the only way a small business owner and the economy can thrive is by having visitors as well as other strategies. So this is a key component to where we work. One of the things that we are talking about right now, and it's tied to the airport, it's the next slide, is the importance of creating a biological border. What does that mean? It means that if, we need to find a strategy to stay open, the economy to stay open, but stay safe. Because if not, it's going to be a long term before we have a vaccine, before we have a cure. How do we ensure that we're able to actually stay open and prevent another outbreak? So we're talking a foundation together with other key stakeholders, government, a hotel association, Chamber of Commerce, other associations. We're talking about the importance of our airport and the infrastructure we have to have there to do not only safety and hygiene protocols, also screening and testing, contact tracing, and quarantine and care. This is key to protect not just the population of Puerto Rico, but the people that have a pent-up demand of wanting to travel and get out of their houses. And from New York, all the Puerto Ricans that are dying to come and get on a plane and see their grandmother and come to the island of Puerto Rico and visit. They have to protect, as we have to make sure that we can help the economy, but also protect our residents. And our last slide, and I'll leave it for that for questions, is just highlighting how our main objective is how do we develop, thought leadership, policy recommendations together with key stakeholders to help protect our community while using the increase of influx of visitors. This is key to the Caribbean, especially where our economies were, beautiful and sunny all year round. And when the winter comes, I'm sure people are going to want to come to our locations. So thank you for the opportunity of being here, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Annie Mayol. That was very interesting. And I spoke with the CEO of a major cruise company recently, and he was saying that, and it's counterintuitive, but he was saying that that's, they think, going to be the safest way to travel in the future. And he was referring to what you're saying, the biological borders that can be created if all the stakeholders work in a coordinated way, and they are able to get tourism going in this area, in this region. And of course, I'm thinking cruise ships are a major part of that in Puerto Rico. So hopefully that will work out for the island. I know we have a few questions, but I'm just going to introduce Conor Walsh. He's a country representative for Honduras and the Caribbean, based in Tegucigalpa. I'm sorry, he's based in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic.
Oh, yeah, right.
Sorry about that, Conor.
No worries.
We're going to be talking about a very important topic, water scarcity and food security. I was looking at, we'll probably talk about Mexico in a little while, but just yesterday, the number of people who are going to become food insecure in that country, some estimates are up to 10 million. So I'm guessing the situation in Central America and in other parts of the region are as critical as we see in Mexico, or even worse.
Yeah, absolutely. The situation is critical. Thank you, Enrique, for the introduction. My name is Conor Walsh, and I'm the country representative based in Tegucigalpa for Catholic Relief Services. And I'm going to be talking about water scarcity and food insecurity, not just in Honduras, but also in Guatemala, in El Salvador, and in Nicaragua, where the conditions are in many ways very similar. My experience is mostly in Honduras. I've lived here for a total of 9 years now, but I've seen very common patterns across the region. So first of all, let me just start by thanking everybody for being on this call and for showing interest. It's at a very critical time that we're organizing this charla. And I feel doubly privileged as one of the few speakers on this panel who doesn't have Latino heritage, as far as I'm aware, but I have spent the majority of my career in Latin America and the Caribbean, so I do feel somewhat familiar with, but also associated with the region, and I feel a great love for the region. Let me start off by saying something you all already know. Central America is a highly, highly vulnerable region to begin with. COVID-19 couldn't have struck at a much worse time because already all 4 countries are reeling under the effects of what I call a triple emergency. It's almost like a 3-alarm fire. Before COVID-19, Central America, that includes Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and of course Honduras, and especially the parts of those countries that are in the so-called dry corridor, have been suffering from irregular rains. Now, it's not uncommon, it's normal for the rains to come and then to be a dry season. That's the way the patterns usually work. But with climate change, the rains have become far more irregular, and we've now had 3, if not more, years of irregular rainfall, and that has resulted in drought, and it has resulted in failed crops. And when crops fail, obviously there's a shortage of food. It's that simple. However, in addition to failures in the crops, when it gets dry, there's a long-term impact on the availability of water. The water supply where I live in Tegucigalpa is at critical levels. People are predicting scenarios. It's going to be similar to Cape Town, which is almost run out of water. And although the rains have started, I'm looking out of my window now and there are clouds in the sky. The damage has been done because the rains have failed. It'll take a while for the reservoirs to fill up again. And when there's dryness, there are fires. We have been living under a blanket of smoke for the past 2 months almost in Tegucigalpa and really across the country and the rest of Central America. Forest fires are out of control, and that's partly attributable to the drought, but it's also inadequate fire control systems, it's inappropriate farming practices, and it's just a tendency to burn when it's the dry season. So it's aggravating the environmental emergency that we're living through. And then on top of that comes COVID. COVID is, of course, a respiratory illness. And when you're suffering from bad air quality, you're that much more vulnerable to becoming ill. With lower food production, obviously, you're more vulnerable as well. And then all governments in the region have instituted lockdowns, with the exception of Nicaragua. And when you have a lockdown, it means that people who live from day to day can't go out into the street and earn their living. So food scarcity is increasing, and that's having just a compounding effect on the health of the entire population. I talked about a 3-alarm fire. There's also the problem of dengue fever, which has been with us for many, many years. Every time there's a drought followed by heavy rains, there's flooding, and when there's flooding, there's more mosquitoes, and we expect an outbreak of dengue, which has no treatment and has no cure. You just have to get through it, and a lot of people die. This is a region, Central America has something like 45 million people, so just imagine how many people are suffering on the edge of collapse now. The good news is that CRS is active. We work with our partner organizations. Many of our partners are from the Catholic Church. Caritas is the main implementing partner, but we have other church partners as well who help us deliver services to the communities in need. And what we're doing is we're providing immediate food distributions. We have programs throughout Central America that provide food to vulnerable populations. Here in Honduras, we have an education program that uses food as an input, and we were able to distribute the food instead of through the school meals program by preparing take-home rations, but accompanying that with messages about safety and hygiene and doing it in such a way that doesn't expose people to additional risk of infection when they collect the food. We're also working on a lot of communication about safe hygiene. The problem with the lack of water is that when you don't have water, how are you going to wash your hands? And that's the #1 recommendation, wash your hands all the time. I was just in the store earlier today. Today was my day for going out to go to the store. And time after time, they said, wash your hands constantly. Well, you can't do that if you don't have water and soap. And then on top of that, with the COVID emergency in the US, there's also a drop in remittances. So that's also having a further compounding impact on the crisis. Long story short, we're headed for some really lean times here in Central America. International aid flows have also reduced. The US government froze aid to the Northern Triangle, and it suspended aid to Nicaragua many years ago. And this is the worst time to cut off aid. We need more aid, not less aid. So that's what we're doing in Washington. We're advocating for the inclusion of humanitarian assistance in legislation, in COVID-19 legislation that's going through the House and through the Senate. And if you can add your voice to that, that would be a major, major contribution. So I really want to thank you again for all the work that you're doing. Hang in there, but please don't forget your neighbors down south, which you all are very familiar with. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Conor, for the good work you're doing in Honduras. And like you said, it's unfortunately a perfect storm. I remember not long ago covering one of the caravans that was coming from Central America through Mexico to the U.S. border, and I saw some friends from the Weather Channel joining the caravan, and I asked them, "Why are you covering this?" And they explained to me in detail how collapse in crops, the drought, and all those climate factors are a key factor in driving migration from places like Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador to the U.S. So again, thank you for reminding us the role that climate change is playing in this, and how it just makes things so much harder in the middle of the current emergency. Hopefully, and I know we're getting some questions about that too. Thank you, Conor Walsh from Tegucigalpa. I got it wrong the first time, not this time. Leonor Cruz, she's the head of the office in the Dominican Republic, based in Santo Domingo. Unfortunately, Leonor, we've seen an increase, not just in the Americas, but around the world, in cases of domestic violence, in the vulnerability of women in the household. And I know you will talk about that today with us. So if you can share a few thoughts, we'd really appreciate it. Welcome, Leonor.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. Quédate en casa, stay home, means something different for women in these situations. For many women, it might mean stay within the walls of your house to be mistreated by someone at home. In the Dominican Republic, during normal times, women are confronted with different forms of violence, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, discrimination, and inequality of opportunities, in addition to the difficulty in accessing basic services. From June 2005 to June 2019, Dominican Republic has 1,392 feminicides, one of the highest rates in Latin America. Just in the first semester of 2019, 8,860 gender-based violence cases were reported, 2,980 for physical abuse, 2,195 for verbal and psychological abuse, and 3,685 for sexual abuse. The vast majority carried out by men at home. Even though the government is reporting fewer cases and complaints during COVID-19, that doesn't mean that the issue doesn't continue. Family tensions and violence don't just happen overnight. And now the confinement, the different stressors, the uncertainty, the situation for already vulnerable women is probably escalating, and women no longer have the safety nets they usually rely on. We know this is happening, and listen to what we are hearing. Leonor, please help. What more can we do? I feel helpless. We are receiving so many phone calls from women being abused at home by their partners. To make matters worse, the police sometimes do not even want to receive their complaints because of the fear of being infected. We need help. Without the access to physical support system, support groups become even more important. Since 2015, Suarez has been implementing GAM, Women Support Groups, Grupos de Apoyo de Mujeres, Mujer No Está Sola, an evidence-based methodology that has proven effectiveness for changing women's lives. GAM has filled a real gap in the DR and has served as a way to bring three governmental Dominican agencies, the Ministry of Women, the PROSOLI, Programa from the Vice Presidency of the Dominican Republic, and the Center for the Attention of Survivors of Violence, working as one on women issues through GAM. We train key personnel from these institutions to become facilitators and mentors in the GAN methodology. Those GAN mentors and facilitators continue meeting online because of regulations dictated by the national government during the COVID-19 situation. In March 2020, the regional office of CRS conducted a survey with the GAN facilitators and mentors of 4 countries, Dominican Republic, Mexico, Guatemala, and El Salvador, where GAN is being implemented to better comprehend the reality faced by women, by the women, and the strategies better to maintain information flow with GAN during the COVID crisis. 75% of the respondents of the survey were from the Dominican Republic. Women said they needed help to relieve stress because of worries related to becoming sick, to not having food, income, and not to be able to continue in their GAMs, and the possibility of violence erupting at home. We are supporting women in assuming leadership to keep ourselves and our families safe, and at the same time contribute to our communities with solidarity and hope. The facilitators and mentors have received from CRS material on self-care to protect from being infected by COVID-19, on how to regulate their emotions, resiliency messages, videos, motivational phrases and messages promoting a more equitable distribution of housework. And we have also formed an international practice community of facilitators and mentors with the 4 countries which meets monthly. In April 2020, I clearly remember our first online practice community meeting. The topic was self-care during COVID-19. One of the Dominican participants said, "I needed this. I was so stressed and worried during my day-to-day work. I sometimes forget to take time and work on myself. Today was especially heavy and crazy. So many problems, so much confusion and anxiety. I needed this time to remember to stop, to breathe, to understand and continue helping. Thanks." Through this participative face-to-face meeting, women were given the opportunity to vent and express their fears and emotions. I know what is to be stressed and worried during the COVID-19 crisis because Jose, my husband, had it. I was scared, but thanks to the self-care tools that we promote in the GAM and my faith in God, we were able to live this experience in peace and thankful. Thanks to God, Jose is doing great. And now he helps around the house. And together we are helping other people that have lived through this experience. Recently, CRS requested a joint meeting with the mentor of the 3 Dominican government institutions to listen to what they were currently doing and to motivate more synergy amongst us. We agreed to share key information and to support each other. We also helping in Cuba by funding Caritas from the Diocese of Holguín and Matanzas so they can purchase food to prepare for the elder who eat at the comedores based in the houses of volunteers. We are also providing them with hygiene products, and now currently Caritas Cuba is, because it's of the scarcity of food, is giving cash to the elderly for them to buy their own food. CRS believes that we have to confront the issue as a united front together. And that is how we have worked and continue to work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leonor, and thank you for sharing that very personal experience with the virus. I know you're not alone in that. Many of us have family members, loved ones that have fallen ill, and I'm glad to see your husband is doing better and that you're not just recovering as a family, but you're helping your community recovering in the Dominican Republic. So thank you so much, Leonor. And I want to speak now to the Emergency Program Manager in Caracas, in Venezuela, Maria Jose Alexander, about immigration. it seems that Venezuela has a crisis on top of a crisis, on top of another crisis, and so on. And it's just difficult to think of how things can get better. But people like you, Maria Jose, CRS, and other organizations on the ground are trying to do exactly that. So thank you for joining us. Talk a little bit about the challenge of having a lot of migrants coming back from Colombia, which I know is the case, trying to do that in an orderly way, and also sharing a border with Brazil, which is one of the countries that has had the biggest outbreaks in the Americas.
Thank you, and Enrique, for the presentation, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Jose, and I work, as Enrique said, as a program manager for the Venezuela response, providing support to Caritas Venezuela through CRS Empower program, which provides capacity strengthening to Caritas. And yes, as Conor also mentioned, for the situation in Central America, COVID-19 also arrived in Venezuela, to a already devastated country. Besides the situation and the continued crisis that Venezuela has been facing during the past years, together with growing political tensions as well, there's a growing concern on the consequences of the COVID-19 crisis, which are worsening not only the already growing hyperinflation, dollarization of goods and services in the country, besides the economic crisis, but also is worsening the humanitarian situation that the country was already facing, especially the situation with food insecurity, migration, and now with returnees as well. We are now seeing a wave of returnees who have lost their jobs in Colombia and other neighboring countries and are coming back to Venezuela. There are thousands of returnees. The government estimates that there are around 15,000 returnees, but Caritas Venezuela has estimated that number could be around 40,000 people. This is really concerning because as they arrive to Venezuela, they are being forced to remain in quarantine in shelters with no appropriate hygiene measures, and raising the risk of COVID-19 in a country where the national health system is very weak, with constant blackouts, shortages in water, in medical supplies, and medical personnel as well. In early March, as a preventive measure to spread the virus, the government took strict measures with only 2 confirmed cases, as Annie mentioned, happened in Puerto Rico as well, and enforced a lockdown all over the country, where people is only allowed to leave their homes for food or medical treatment. This lockdown has, of course, lots of side effects. One of them is, as Leonor was mentioning, there's the growing concern on the increase of gender-based violence and on the vulnerability of women and girls around this topic. The NGO response in general has been very challenging in the country because besides the lockdown, the country is facing an enormous shortage of gasoline, and with checkpoints all over the country. So NGOs are struggling to move around and to provide assistance. However, Caritas Venezuela, as they have always had a very strong presence in the country, and they are now able to, they were able to get these government permissions, or salvoconductos, the way they call it, to be able to get gasoline and to pass through the checkpoints as well. Therefore, there's been a huge response from Caritas Venezuela in terms of WASH, water, sanitation, hygiene, nutrition, psychosocial support, and food security. In terms of WASH, they've been handing out hygiene kits, including face masks and other related items, to vulnerable families by going door to door, and also providing accurate information on hygiene measures, on how to wash their hands, etc., to prevent not only the spread of the virus, but also the spread of misinformation, which is sometimes worse. They have also established a hotline to provide psychosocial support to anyone who needs it, and especially migrants. They, on the other hand, they have adapted all of their programs, and CRS has also been supporting this them on this process. And they have, for example, the Saman program, which is one of the biggest, the strongest program that they have in terms of malnutrition. They have been, in this program, they weigh and measure children under 5 to determine their nutritional status, and then provide them with ready-to-use therapeutic foods. They have now been assessing children door to door and providing families with a month ration of these therapeutic foods to avoid gatherings. During this time, despite the lockdown, Caritas Venezuela has been able to assess the nutritional status of over 1,000 children, and which is really significant. In terms of food security, Caritas Venezuela has provided cash to 350 vulnerable families from 7 dioceses around the country in April. And also with the technical support of CRS, Caritas is starting a new phase of the Tengo program, which is a cash-based program where in this new phase that started in May, they will be providing cash-based assistance to 9,000 families together with wash workshops, hygiene kits, and other response related to COVID-19. And finally, we are also helping them in the development of a proposal to help and provide food assistance to old people in 3 dioceses and to prisoners, as well to returnees in the border with Colombia. This is something, but this is how Caritas Venezuela has been adapting their programming and starting new programs to specifically respond to the COVID-19 crisis, and also how CRS is providing technical assistance and capacity building to Caritas Venezuela.
Thank you so much, Maria Jose, for that information. Again, I think moving from the experience of Central America and the Caribbean to South America, and particularly to Venezuela, is enlightening to see what's going on in the region and some of the challenges, some of them common challenges that we're facing. Now I want to introduce Cassandra Bissainthe. I hope I didn't mispronounce your last name too badly. But she's a technical advisor for partnerships and for capacity. She's based here in Miami, Florida, as I am, so we're not too far away, Cassandra. But if you can talk a little bit about what you're doing right now and some of the specific issues that you're facing through this crisis.
Sure. Thank you. Bissainthe. I am originally from Haiti, but based here in Miami, Florida with my 3 young kids, where we're going through this pandemic. Very unusual situation. As like Maria Jose said, I am a technical advisor for working for partnership and capacity strengthening as part of the Empower program. So mainly supporting our partners in the South American zone, but also in the Caribbean. And through this Empower program, CRS does not have a physical presence in a lot of those South American countries or Caribbean countries. So we really put a value into the partnerships, into the local partnerships that we have on the ground with our partners. We mainly work in countries like Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, and in the Caribbean, we also work with Haiti and with my fellow sister on the other island, Leonor in the Dominican Republic, but also we work in Jamaica, St. Lucia, Grenada, and so on. And particularly our support for our partners in the South American zone, particularly in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, has been to provide technical support and technical assistance to allow them to adapt their programming to serve the vulnerable communities, especially Venezuelan migrants living in these countries. As you know, many of those countries, for instance, in Colombia, they have been severely impacted and the restrictions in country have been very strong and strict. So Colombia is home to over 2 million Venezuelan migrants, and it is estimated that about 15,000 or 11,000 have crossed the border back to Venezuela. And these are only the registered migrants. So it is expected that those numbers are even higher. So Caritas Colombia has had to adapt their programming, but also to provide hygiene kits, food kits to these migrants and adapt their program, work with the Ministry of Health to conduct these sort of distributions as well. Also in Ecuador, Suarez is still working with Caritas Ecuador, but also providing financial support to Caritas Ecuador to provide a more immediate response, particularly to Guayaquil, where they have 70% of the cases where they're registered. We're also supporting them in providing canastas, kit de higienes, also kit de alimentos, that they're also doing distribution in Las Esmeraldas as well. And as you can imagine, this is a very critical situation. Migrants are losing their jobs because they work mainly in the informal sector. So our partner on the ground is really finding ways on making sure these vulnerable populations are still accessing the most necessary food items or hygiene kits that they need. So, and also doing hygiene promotion. How do you make sure you adapt your lifestyle a little bit to the current situation? I think also in the Caribbean, in countries like St. Lucia, Grenada, the numbers have been fairly low, not as very high as some places in the South America, but still it's been an adaptation. For countries like Haiti, for instance, the numbers have been rapidly increasing in the past couple of days. I think people are not very understanding of what is going on. So although the government has put restrictions in place, people are not very understanding or applying these restrictions or these guidelines, because if you do not go out in the street and earn your living through the informal sector, you are pretty much left to die, which is a very similar scenario that we're also seeing in other South American countries. People are not able to go out in the informal sectors. So through the cajas de cogidas that our partners are managing, they have to make sure they provide food assistance in the cafeterias. So for our program in Haiti, for instance, with CRS, we recently were able to access some funding from the US government, from the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, where our partner Caritas Haiti will be providing WASH, so water and hygiene and sanitation. So they'll be having washing hand stations, but providing water and soap, but also having some making also providing hygiene kits to families too, and also having the components of psychosocial support. Again, our work with our partners is mainly accompanying them through the process. They are on the ground delivering these services in these countries in South America and the Caribbean, as CRS does not have a physical presence. But the value of our partnership and our accompaniment through these activities that they're doing on the ground is really putting a lot of value of what they're doing on the ground as well. So it is a pleasure for me to, I guess, keep talking about this. This is a very passionate subject for me, and I hope I was able to convey.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. I promise to work on my Creole in the future. And really, what you're talking about is crucial to understanding where we are right now in terms of the pandemic. The Americas are driving the spread of the virus around the world. Unfortunately, it's in our backyard, as we knew it was going to happen, and it's important to see how so-called emerging markets and our countries are dealing with this emergency, because until now it really hadn't been felt in the underdeveloped world as it is happening at this moment. Cecilia Suarez, she's in Mexico. She's the country manager, and she's going to talk a little bit about trying to limit the spread of the virus among migrant communities there. Full disclosure, Cecilia, I'm not just working for Univision. I'm also a correspondent for 60 Minutes. And my first trip, my first story, now that we're coming out of isolation and we're trying to come back out on the field, is going to be at that migrant shelter in Matamoros. We really want to know what's happening with the virus there. We're going to be working with some partners to figure out the best way to tell that story. But I think it's something that it's in everyone's mind, right? How do we protect these communities, especially when they haven't received any sort of humanitarian support, from Mexico's government as they promised to do.
Well, thank you, Enrique, for the introduction. And yes, that's precisely the things that I'm going to share with all of you today. Thank you for the Hispanic Heritage Foundation as well for inviting CRS and including me in this presentation. As Enrique was pointing out, the emergency crisis due to the COVID-19 quarantine with the migrant population has created a major, has worsened their situation. And as my previous colleagues were sharing with all of you, the topic that I'm going to share today, it's the summary of all the problems that Latin American countries are facing for the last years, many years now. The draw in Central America, the increased violence in our countries, the political tensions, all these issues that they already present are the consequences, the causes of the people needed to flee their countries. So COVID is coming into the top of this, and it's affecting one of the most vulnerable populations in the region, the migrants, asylum seekers, and internally displaced people. And since October 2018, when migrants decided that it was safer to travel in massive caravans, a humanitarian emergency situation emerged and has been worsening. So we only see since October 2018 that the situation is getting worse and worse for all these people moving around. And following Connor's idea of the triple emergency, I'm going to explain the situation summarizing 3 emergency facts with the migrant population. One is that the migrant people coming now to Mexico are far more vulnerable as they are coming from many different countries. They speak very different and very different languages and have very different traditions and customs. So we are dealing with people from many different situations. A lot of solo mothers with small kids, teenagers alone, people facing persecution, people with trauma caused by violence in their home countries, families fleeing gangs, threats, and obviously, add to all that, extreme poverty. And adding to that situation, we have the anti-migratory policies all over the region, and the constant persecution and the increased xenophobia. And adding to that fact as well, we have crowded shelters, communities and volunteers that doesn't have any more resources to attend all these amazing numbers coming into the country, and trying to respond to the increasing emergency now that has worsened to the restrictions imposed by the COVID-19 quarantine. So as fair respondents have been faith-based organizations, we have now 115 migrant shelters run by Catholic church parishes or community centers that have their donations reduced, volunteers that stop going, and an urgent need to entertain people that has been kept inside the shelters. Migrants were already experiencing mental health problems, and now enclosed, all these mental health issues are really increasing and are very challenging for the people helping them. We have all these detention centers that release people, and they are just trying to get a place to be sheltered, and they are desperately trying to find jobs because they need to keep sending money home. And obviously, the lack of medical services to attend this population is a major concern. As Enrique was saying, we have shelters with COVID-19 cases, and in these enclosed spaces without the minimum space to really separate people and to keep everybody safe. CRS is helping now 25 shelters in the north, central, and south of the country, in coordination as well with Guatemala, where we are also helping shelters in Tecunuman and La Ciudad de Guatemala. And we're trying to provide technical expertise to these teams to manage the situation. We are supporting them with food, medicine, and some infrastructure. And I want to finish only saying that the quarantine is a luxury that not everyone can afford. And among the most vulnerable are those who have fled their countries. So I want to finish, thank you all the church partners and the faith-based organizations that are actually becoming the mothers and fathers of these people that are without shelter, very fragile, a lot of children, and the church again has becoming a witness of solidarity and compassion. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, and thank you, Annie. Thank you to Conor in Honduras, Annie in Puerto Rico. Thank you so much, Leonor from the Dominican Republic, Maria Jose in Venezuela, Cassandra here in Miami, Cecilia in Mexico, for sharing your experiences. I'm going to introduce Darío Collado, the Director of Strategic Development at the Hispanic Heritage Foundation. He's going to take care of the Q&A part of our conversation. I just wanted to say thanks for letting me be a part of this today. Your work is inspiring. You're really a lifeline to these communities that have been abandoned by their governments, by many sectors of their own society, and I always feel that I'm taking the best of our interactions, because I feel like there's so many stories, so much to say about what you're doing and what people should know about and how to support that work that you do. So again, I'm Enrique Acevedo. Thank you for having me today. I'm going to do a live hit now for Univision. I'm sorry I have to step off the call, but Darío, my friend, if you can take care of the Q&A, and I'm looking forward to reconnecting with everyone soon. So thanks again to everyone.
Thank you, Enrique. Really appreciate all of your help and your time.
I think we're having an issue with the audio, or is it just me?
For joining. Please join us again next week. Excuse me. We have several questions. The first question, while we have time, for Cecilia Suarez, what is the impact of the pandemic that it is creating among the migrant population in Mexico?
Well, we have several shelters that already have people inside with COVID. But up to now, everybody has been able to receive medical assistance, and international organizations are really working very hard and very fast to create possibilities to separate these people from the other rest of the population. So as far as we are now, nobody has been dying, and no big crisis have been happening without control. So we hope that this will continue.
Great, thank you, Cecilia. The next question is for Conor. Conor, how is the pandemic affecting the hunger and poverty levels in the Northern Triangle countries?
Yeah, I think I got into that a little bit. The numbers are not looking good. The humanitarian community uses something called a famine early warning system that allows you to chart levels of food insecurity. And although much of the region was already at level 2, which means stressed, with the COVID-19 epidemic and continuing impact of climate change and drought, a large part of the population is now moving into level 3, which is crisis. That means they will not have enough food to get through the hunger season, which is between June next month and September. This is going to affect millions of people. It's going to cause further migration flows or pressures. And adding COVID to this just makes it all the more complicated, because with the lockdowns that I mentioned, people are unable to go out and work and earn a living from day to day. I'm fine here in my house. You know, I can still get my groceries, but I'm the exception. It's the vast majority that have to go out, and they have to find a way of getting from one day to the next. So it's not looking good, but it can be resolved through massive assistance. We need food assistance. We need assistance with health and hygiene kits and messaging. And we just need overall higher levels of foreign aid so that these countries which are already on the brink do not fall over it.
Sure. Thank you, Conor. Really appreciate that answer. Our next question is for Cassandra. And the question is, what are CRS's recommendations to cope with the COVID-19 crisis among the most vulnerable?
I think this is a very tough answer for this. I think because it depends. COVID is not lived. It's not a one size fits all. So everybody will experience COVID differently, especially for vulnerable communities. Host communities also, we need to think about, you know, how also they're supporting these vulnerable communities or these vulnerable migrants that are living in their communities. So I think having a one-shot answer would not be the right answer, because people, different experiences would be different, but definitely the support they get from partner organizations like the Caritas in the country or other social organizations providing aid and support to these vulnerable communities definitely is a plus in making sure they can live through this pandemic and they can live through and survive through those difficult times and challenging times. But also we should not undermine the value of host communities and their role that they play assisting these vulnerable groups as well, and the very significance. And also the work that family members, I feel like your support group, your surrounding system has a major role to play in how you go through this very difficult time right now.
Great. Thank you, Cassandra, for that. Really appreciate it. The next question that we have, and again, for anyone that has any questions, please feel free to type in your questions on the bottom at the Q&A, so that we have several minutes still remaining so that we can still take a few more questions. The next question comes from Soledad, and feel free, any of the panelists who would like to answer this question. Any news on how the people who have been living near the U.S.-Mexico border are doing, specifically the refugees in the camps?
Well, I can reply to that one. The people were trying to get into, the people that are stuck at the northern border were actually not very happy to get into the camps that were settled by the government, because that doesn't allow them to work. So they try to rent places and to organize with other families to share some of the apartments. And so they are trying to not get into these camps because they will be enclosed and not able to do temporary jobs. The situation is really serious in the northern border cities, and a lot of these people as well are moving from one place to the other, trying to find jobs or places to stay in one city, and then if they cannot succeed, then move to another city. So people are moving around trying to find a way to cross this quarantine in the best way they can.
Hi all, I think we're having a connection issue, but I'm happy to quickly take over a little bit while Dario gets adjusted. So another question that I saw come in through the Q&A that is coming from Osman, who was a presenter last week, and I think that is an important question for everyone. So I'd like Annie to share her response, as well as someone from the CRS team. So he's asking, how can I get involved and volunteer to help the people during this pandemic in Central America? I am from Honduras and I live in Washington, D.C.
I'll just mention, even though it talks about Central America and South America, one of the things that in the case of Puerto Rico, we're looking for support, and this is something virtual, is people that can provide mentorship in Spanish to business owners, entrepreneurs. There's a lot of stress on the, especially in this situation, especially with people that own small businesses. And in the case of Puerto Rico, they do not speak English. So a lot of the support that exists at the national US level tends to be in English, presentations, webinars, etc. So we're using resources that are Puerto Ricans from the diaspora or that are Hispanics. And, Foundation for Puerto Rico, you can go to our website or just send me an email, because definitely with the new reality of using virtual technology, we can get support as a volunteer online to the people here in Puerto Rico.
Maybe I could just briefly speak about Central America. From the perspective of CRS, it's a little tricky because our own staff that are based here are unable to go to the field and work in the communities, except under very tight conditions. I mentioned some food distributions that we've done, but it requires certain very strict security protocols and planning, coordination. The majority of our staff are working from home, and we can't get out until the curfew is lifted and until we relax the restrictions a little. However, there are ways for you to volunteer from the US, if that's what you were referring to. I think Lydia might be best based to address that question. We do have a network of volunteers and volunteer coordinators. Reach out to the US community, the Catholic community in the US, and others of goodwill who support the work that CRS does. What is needed now is funding, to be honest, because that's where the real need is. That's where the real shortages are being felt. The government of Honduras, in its defense, is doing what it can to distribute food to the neediest populations, but its limited resources are going to come to an end soon. And there's always some questions about how governments distribute aid. That's the advantage of supporting CRS. When you support CRS, we work directly with the people, we work directly with the communities, and little by little, we're pushing out and we're moving out to the field when we have the right conditions and are able to provide minimum levels of assistance.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think that was it for our questions. Now I will hand it back over to Dario Collado, my colleague, to close it out. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it for these questions and the speakers. You all definitely provided some really, really great insights. We are now coming to the end of the charla. Again, we appreciate everyone for joining. Please join us again next week for a Spanish LOFT Charla on being undocumented during COVID-19. We will send you the invitation. Feel free to invite your family and friends. The HHF team will also be following up with the resources mentioned throughout the charla. I hope you all have a great weekend, and muchísimas gracias for your time. Take care.